This week's gospel continues our journey through Jesus' most famous collection of teachings, the Sermon on the Mount. And this week, there's some really challenging stuff in here, right? So he talks about this concept of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, right? He's saying, you've heard this, right? This is the rule that a lot of people like to follow, right? Eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth means if you damage my eye, I get to damage your eye. If you knock my tooth out, I get to knock out one of your teeth. If you steal my Lego set, I get to steal one of your Lego sets, right? If whatever you do to me, I get to do it right back to you. This law of retribution, right? And so Jesus is challenging us, don't do that. Don't be like that, right? This plays out in our homes all the time, right? It plays out with my kids. I'm sure it plays out with your kids, right? Our kids are fighting over something, or they've got this deep sense of fairness being everything is equal. That's not what fairness is, right? Fairness, justice is everyone gets what they deserve, not necessarily everybody gets the same thing, right? And as parents, it's impossible for us to keep track of who had so much time with this toy and so much time with that, right? It's just not going to happen. And Jesus is saying, don't worry about it, right? Don't do it that way. There's not this eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, tit for tat kind of thing, right? And then he gives us some specific instances of what he means by this, right? So when someone slaps you on the cheek, he says, don't slap them back, turn the other cheek to them. This is not meant to be just take on abuse and don't ever do anything about it. The idea behind turning the other cheek is, I know that you will not demean yourself and demean me by doing that to me a second time. So here's my other cheek, right? It's kind of an affront. You're pointing out to them you just did something wrong. Then he goes through, a bunch of other things. If someone asks you to go a mile with them, go 2. If they ask you for a tunic, give them your cloak. If they ask you for this, give them that. Right? And the idea is go above and beyond. So remember way back at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount and those Beatitudes, Jesus talked about this ladder to holiness, right? Blessed are the poor in spirit, people who are detached from things. You have stuff, but you don't need stuff. This is the way to become poor in spirit, to become detached. When someone asks you for an hour of your time, give them 2 hours of your time. When someone asks you for to borrow a coat, give them 2 coats, right? Go above and beyond to help yourself be detached from things, and then you're being extra helpful in the way that they've asked, right? And then he goes on and he talks about being perfect, right? That's the ultimate call here, is we're supposed to be perfect as God is perfect. We are so used to hearing that word perfect in a very negative way, right? Perfection is this thing that is unattainable. None of us can be perfect all the time, right? Perfection is so hard to achieve, and it is. Jesus is calling us to perfection, but what perfection can be translated a bunch of different ways, right? Perfection also means complete or whole or entire, right? We are called, he calls us to be complete people as our Father in heaven is complete. Be whole as our Father in heaven is whole. And so that's what this term perfection means. He wants us to be whole. He wants us to be poor in spirit, to be detached from these things, to be not going eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth after people around us, but to be whole and complete. This is the perfection that God calls us to, this perfection of joy and happiness. And this law of retribution doesn't get us there, but this law of turning the other cheek, of giving more than is asked, that's what gets us to perfection.